The Taliban's lightning-fast assault sweeps across Afghanistan. They've captured most of the countryside and are seizing provincial capitals by the day. Can Afghan security forces still protect the country, or is it just a matter of time before the government in Kabul collapses? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the battle for power in Afghanistan. "20 years after the Taliban was deposed, they're advancing with such ferocity they seem on track to retake control of the country. As the last U.S. troops pull out, the Taliban is making gains faster than anyone expected, and Afghan forces are fighting for survival. In the space of a week, the militant group has taken over 10 of Afghanistan's 34 provincial capitals. Now, first to fall was Zaranj in Nimruz province in the south. Within days, Sheberghan and Saripul had been taken while Afghan soldiers surrendered in Kunduz. The Taliban then seized Talokan and Aybak in the north. The next day, Farah and Pulikumri were overrun. Then the militant group took control of Faizabad and the strategic city of Ghazni, just 150 kilometers from Kabul. It's estimated that the Taliban now controls up to 2/3 of the country. As the group sweeps its way from city to city, many have been caught in the crossfire. More than 1,000 civilians have been killed, and the United Nations warns Afghanistan is facing a humanitarian crisis. Here are some of the people who've been forced to flee.
There was a bombing. A rocket hit my house. We had to escape. Now we are here in a park. We don't know anyone here to help us, and we don't have money. We even forget to bring our national ID cards. We walk with slippers. We didn't have the chance to put on our shoes.
My husband was martyred, and then we left our village. My niece's husband was also martyred. There was always bombardments and shooting. We didn't have any other place to go. That's why we came here.
If the Taliban wants to take control and govern, they must choose a political way to proceed. Fighting and war will bring destruction.
In Ghazni, the Taliban are not allowing girls and women to go to the bazaar. They are applying very strict rules there.
We will die either by bullets or hunger. I just have my children with me. I lost everything, my home and everything. Now I fear losing my children from hunger.
I am leaving here. All people have left. There is bombing from the air and Taliban are on the ground.
We want a normal life just like everyone else. I want my children to become something in Afghanistan, to become doctors, engineers or something. That is my hope.
Well, Afghans are desperate for the fighting to stop, but the government is losing more control by the day. In a bid to boost morale, President Ashraf Ghani made his way to Mazar-e-Sharif to rally government troops. The capital of Balkh province was once an anti-Taliban stronghold, and if it falls, Afghan forces will completely lose control of the north. Ghani has made personnel changes in the hope of turning things around, sacking his third army chief in a year. But with time running out, that might not be enough. U.S. intelligence reckons the Taliban could capture Kabul in just 3 months. But U.S. forces won't be coming to their rescue. When President Joe Biden was asked if he regrets the decision to withdraw, he said no. The U.S. has done enough.
We spent over $1 trillion, over 20 years. We trained and equipped with modern equipment over 300,000 Afghan forces. And Afghan leaders have to come together. We lost death and injury, thousands of American personnel. They've got to fight for themselves, fight for their nation.
Well, on the battlefield, the Taliban are clearly winning, and there's been little progress in diplomatic talks in Doha. So is it only a matter of time before the Taliban takes control? And whose fault is it really that they've come this far? Well, joining me now to discuss that from Kabul is Javid Faisal, an advisor to Afghanistan's National Security Council. From New York is Adam Weinstein, a former U.S. Marine who served in Afghanistan in 2012 and is now a research fellow at the Quincy Institute. And from Islamabad, we have Asad Durrani, the former head of Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI. Thanks all so much for being with us. Asad Durrani, let me start with you. It is not the Taliban. It is not Afghanistan's neighbors. You believe the United States is to blame for what is happening in Afghanistan right now. Why?
The United States was losing this war right from the beginning. This is not the way how you fight insurgencies. They call it COIN, counterinsurgency. The principles are laid down. This usually means very little minimum force, and most of it is non-force. Now, that type of a combination is very difficult to achieve. In case of the United States, it was not going to happen because the only instrument that it believed in using, because it has so much of it, was the force. If you start bombing everyone with B-52s, you're not going to win the so-called hearts and minds. You're not going to take care of, especially the tribesmen, the way they fight. No insurgency was going to be defeated. In case of Afghanistan, because of their nature, the configuration, the tradition, everything you take into account, they were not going to win. So let me put it very, very briefly. It was the flawed strategy, the flawed approach, and of course, why not give credit to the Taliban for hanging in there for 20 years, roughing it out, toughing it out against the world's mightiest alliance. And the way they did it, I think they did much better than their predecessors, the Mujahideens and the others.
Interesting. Adam, did the United States just drop the ball from the beginning, having no idea what they were really up against?
Well, I agree with General Durrani so far as the United States dropping the ball, not having a clear strategy, trying to fight a flawed counterinsurgency campaign. And it is true that the Taliban were a formidable opponent on the battlefield and continue to be. He does shower some praise on the Taliban, though, for sticking it out. And I'd point out that the TTP, sometimes called the Pakistani Taliban, are the ideological cousins of the Afghan Taliban. One might even say the progeny of the Afghan Taliban. And every single week I hear reports about Pakistani frontier corpsmen or Pakistani soldiers being killed. 4 here, 2 there, an IED blast here. Every single week, every few days in some instances by the TTP. So I would say that Pakistan has also dug itself into a bit of a hole that it's now going to find difficult to climb out of. The mistakes were across the board. If it's comforting for Pakistani leaders or former leaders to put all the blame on the United States, perhaps that helps them sleep at night. But the fact of the matter is that Pakistan is going to pay the price for this instability as well.
Okay. Asad Durrani, I'll come back to you on that, but I want to get Javid in the conversation first. I mean, Javid, you are the only Afghan on this panel, actually. I mean, whom do you see at fault? We both have admissions here from the United States had a flawed strategy from the beginning. But while Mr. Durrani says Pakistan is not to blame, Afghanistan's neighbors are not to blame, it is solely the United States. What's your take?
The U.S. and NATO started the global war on terror and toppled the Taliban to eradicate Al-Qaeda. But 20 years later, we see that Al-Qaeda is stronger and more determined to attack the West, as we see in their statements. And in the presence of the United States, in NATO, in Afghanistan, new global terrorist outfits such as the Islamic State emerged. And it tells us that things have not been going on the right direction from day one. But it's not just the US or NATO, it's also the countries in our neighborhood in this region. They did not deny sanctuaries to the global terrorists who were fighting NATO, the US, and the Afghan people for the last 20 years. They provided them sanctuaries and invested in instability, in proxy wars, then peace, in brotherly relations between our countries. But as said earlier, Anything that happens here in Afghanistan, it will not be a problem only of the Afghans or success of the Afghans. If things go wrong, countries in the neighborhood, this region, in the world will be affected by it. So it's important to see some constructive role played by the countries in our neighborhood, in this region, and more attention paid by the US in our NATO allies, because this mission that we have started together 20 years ago must be completed. And again, if the US and NATO were not able to finish a mission, to complete a mission with all their weapons, equipment, and the resources that they had, they should not be expecting the Afghans or blaming the Afghans for not being able to finish this on their own.
Asad Durrani, we've heard very diplomatic words from the other two panelists there, if I can characterize them that way, that Afghanistan is in many ways responsible for providing sanctuary for the Taliban and other terrorist groups. And Pakistan will pay a price for it as well. Why do you not believe that's true? Because that is the most accepted opinion from most analysts. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. As the most analysts have to say whatever they say right now, since you're asking me, I'll give my opinion, whether one likes it or not. My problem is that I am asked to give my assessment, and when I say so-and-so has gone wrong, immediately, the counter is, you're blaming us. I'm not blaming you. In fact, I'm very grateful to the United States that by following this flawed policy, it has lost and it is getting the hell out of here, because its presence was the one that was most uncomfortable for countries like Pakistan and some others in the region, and of course, those Afghans who believe that they have to resist foreign occupation, whether it is Soviets or whatever. So in that sense, I'm not blaming the United States. I'm just trying to work out as to how the whole thing happened. It is the world's mightiest alliance with everything going for it, and the entire world begging it that, look, please change your approach. It's not going to work. And it's even Obama, 2009, he says we must get out. Just a minute. And so, if at all I have to give credit, other than the fact that the Taliban fought in a manner in which I have already said, Pakistan's role was that it ensured that the Taliban remained in a situation that we did not attack them, that ultimately they will throw the foreigners out.
Okay, just to be clear then, you're saying that the U.S. presence, surely its presence in Afghanistan, is actually more uncomfortable for Afghanistan and Pakistan than a Taliban takeover?
I am absolutely saying that because everything else is indigenous to this area. That is for us to take care. This foreign factor, which is a very powerful one, and it has not done any good to most of the people here, the bombings, and I can go on talking about a list. So that was something that had to be taken care of first. If the Taliban turn out to be bad, well, it's going to be up to us, up the region, up to the Afghans, up to the others, to take care of them.
Okay.
But first of all, okay.
Let me just ask Javid quickly, because I want to get a better sense of how common the opinion we heard actually is. How many Afghans, Pashtuns in particular, actually do arguably prefer Taliban rule? I mean, many testify to the Afghan government lacking discipline, being entirely corrupt. We have seen interviews with certain Afghan civilians that say they prefer the rule of the Taliban because it's actually more honest. How much do you think that is perhaps a prevailing opinion in Afghanistan that's been underestimated from the outside?
I think it's important for this region, for our neighbors, to promote state-to-state relations with Afghanistan, and to support and like for us what they like for themselves. If they don't like war crimes committed against their people, if they don't want their media, journalists, comedians, intellectuals killed in violence, they should not support the same thing against us. And this is what is happening in Afghanistan. The Taliban, they are killing people. They are shutting down free media. They are taking away the individual freedoms and rights of the Afghan civilians. They are destroying our cities, our infrastructures. They are denying peace.
Right, that's understood.
Afghans,
that has been very
continue
clear.
To kill that. That's not what the Afghan people want. That's not what the Afghan youth want. I'm an Afghan. I know that. I can present Afghans, others from the region or in our neighborhood who support terrorists cannot speak on the behalf of the Taliban. Maybe they can just speak on behalf of the Taliban that they have been doing, but not on behalf of a country who wants peace, who wants to live, who wants to promote its interests, and who wants to be a moderate country.
Okay. You know, it's interesting, and Adam, let me turn to you, because what Assad was saying actually, it contradicts in a sense what the Pakistani Prime Minister has been saying, in that the Taliban is not really a partner to negotiate with, that he has had even a tremendous time trying to convince them to come to the table, because no matter who, and let's remember, Mr. Durrani, that the Afghan government does represent a very large contingent of Afghans as well, even if they don't agree with the Taliban. So let's listen quickly to what Prime Minister Imran Khan has had to say about his latest dealings in the negotiations.
The political settlement is looking difficult right now. And it's looking difficult right now because the Taliban are refusing, and we tried. I tried to persuade the Taliban. This is months back, 3 or 4 months back. The Taliban senior leadership came here, and we tried to persuade them to come to some sort of a political settlement. The only thing that would stop Afghanistan from descending into anarchy is a political settlement. But unfortunately, the Taliban, when they were here, they felt that they refused to talk to Ashraf Ghani. Their condition is that as long as Ashraf Ghani is there, we are not going to talk to the Afghan government.
Adam, I know I said I'd come to you, but first I want to get Asad Durrani's take on that. How divided then are Pakistanis in this scenario as well, and that Pakistanis such as yourself see the Taliban as an indigenous group that deserves to have certain control of the country, while so many other Afghanis, which your Prime Minister seems to agree with, deserve better than the Taliban because they refuse to participate as negotiating partners and really try to negotiate for peace?
First of all, I do not have to agree with my Prime Minister. I think he is much less knowledge about Afghanistan than people like me who have been dealing with it for the last 30, 40 years. That's just one. So don't throw the Prime Minister on me, but I'm absolutely prepared to talk about, certain other aspects. If they are not popular, they are not popular. But the point is, we have a problem. These are the people who, over a period of time, have won the right to do whatever they are doing, good or bad. Now, one could have understood, one may not have understood, one may agree with their ideology, one may not. But what do? We did not agree with the American approach, but we lived with it for 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, 2012, poor Karzai was shouting, and I said, for God's sake, America, get out. I cannot survive with you. Okay. And then came Ashraf Ghani. And he says that for even in a week, if I do not get the support of the Americans, our government will be out. So what type of a government is that? As far as so many other points are concerned, well, we can have our views. I have no problem. I do not, and that is the reason I don't want to do any value judgment. I just carry out an assessment. I said, we have come to a point. We will now take care of whatever happens.
Okay. Adam Weinstein, let me come to you, because I want to move forward, and regardless really of who's to blame, this is what it is right now. And right now in Doha, there is an offer on the table for what seems to be a power-sharing agreement, and I want you to help me understand what that actually means. Are we talking potentially about breaking up the country into declared Taliban areas versus government areas?
First of all, I don't think either side thinks that partition is an option. And I want to go back to some earlier points that the other guest said. Pakistan did pay a high price in the US-led war on terror. There's no doubt about that. The United States does blame Pakistan often, too much for its own failures in its counterinsurgency. But I see almost zero reflection from our Pakistani guest about the mistakes that Pakistan has made. And he talks about the Taliban sort of winning the right to dictate terms. I mean, that's fine, but would he feel the same way about the TTP? Would he feel the same way about the TTP as a group that killed Pakistani school children in Peshawar, a group that took over SWAT, a group whose leader, Nur Wali Masood, says that he wants to take FATA, the former FATA, or the tribal areas of Pakistan, and put it under his control? Would he feel the same way about that? I don't think so. And to speak to the comments that our Afghan guest said, where he talked about, the NATO and US mission, I think Afghan leaders need to keep in mind that the world has disproportionately invested in Afghanistan compared to other conflict areas and other struggling countries. And that support is coming to an end. The fact of the matter is that Afghans are going to have to fight to have enough leverage to bring the Taliban back to the negotiating table. It's an absolute travesty that thousands of regular ANDSF soldiers are simply surrendering without firing a shot. That's not what's supposed to happen. And the Afghan commandos have performed quite well, given the stress they're under, but that's not how you win a war. So if the Doha process or any other negotiating process is going to succeed, Afghan soldiers are going to have to fight and not let the Taliban simply take provincial capitals without them firing a shot.
Javid Faisal, are they ready to fight? We've heard so much about low morale, that Afghan soldiers are actually running away from the battle. Are they ready to take over the way the United States is now insisting that they must?
They have been doing that. The Afghan forces have been defending their people in their country against the Taliban. That will continue. But the main problem is not that we are not just fighting the Taliban as a group. We are fighting international terrorists. We are fighting Al-Qaeda. We are fighting ISIS. We are fighting many Pakistan-based terrorist outfits here in Afghanistan. The main problem is that the sanctuaries in our neighborhood are still there. They are active. They are training terrorists. And the statesmen who run the country, their heroes are terrorists. This is the main problem. As long as this continues, not just Afghanistan, but this region in the world will not be a safe place. There has to be actions taken against this sponsor of terrorism, so Afghanistan, the region in the world, could be a safe place.
Right. Adam, if I can come back to you, because there is this idea that the United States is pulling out because it keeps insisting this is an unwinnable war. And then the argument on the other side is it was never about being able to win. It was about managing this spillover and even far worse consequences. Do you think the United States decision hasn't considered thoroughly what the consequences, not just for Afghanistan, but for the rest of the world, will actually be by using this excuse that we're getting out because we can't win?
Well, it is. Look, first of all, I'd like to speak to the last speaker's comments. It is true that Pakistan has not played a positive role in the history of the conflict in Afghanistan, but it is not sanctuaries, Al-Qaeda or ISKP that is leading Afghan soldiers to surrender en masse without fighting. It's poor management from the top, lack of a coherent military strategy that's leading them to surrender, and that's a problem that the Afghan government is going to have to solve. It's not about a blame game. It's about the existential survival of the Afghan state, and the only people who can answer that question are the leaders of Afghanistan. In terms of the U.S. withdrawal, I think the Biden administration understood that there was going to be chaos as a result of the withdrawal, but that chaos is, the history of the U.S.-led war in Afghanistan doesn't begin in 2018, and it doesn't begin in 2021 either. It is a foreseeable consequence of the U.S. intervention and a failed nation-building mission that simply didn't have a coherent strategy. And the truth is that there were plenty of opportunities where the United States had leverage and could have tried to negotiate with the Taliban in 2001, about a decade later after that, but chose not to. And one of the problems with fighting an insurgency is just when you feel that you're about to defeat them is also when you have the most leverage to negotiate with them. And too often, American leaders deluded themselves into believing that victory is right around the corner, when in fact they should have been going to the negotiating table and accepting the power dynamics that existed on the ground, and accepting that the only answer to the war in Afghanistan was going to come from Afghans and regional countries who have a permanent stake in security there, versus the United States that was always going to leave. And Afghan elites and Afghan leaders should have understood that the United States was always going to leave. And I think that's something, frankly, that Pakistan did understand, which influenced their decision. But I think it was ultimately short-sighted thinking on the part of the Pakistani state, because we see that insecurity and terrorism is rising inside Pakistan's borders as well. So to put it frankly, everyone's at fault here.
Adam Weinstein, I'm going to have to let you have the last word. Very unfortunately, we're out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, and thanks to our viewers as well for watching. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at @the_newsmakers. We'd love to hear your comments, and we'll see you next time.